We're glad to have you with us today. We're counting down to our next bar exam, which right now is a little under 100 days away, and that's certainly a bellwether point for a lot of people. But perhaps to you, the bar is still a distant event. Many of you have certainly begun your studies already. That's great news, and I encourage that. 100 days until the bar exam, to some people, seems like a very short period of time. In other words, to those folks, it feels like the exam is going to be right on top of them. But I think for most people, 100 days, when we think about bar exam days, is still a very long time away. It's what I've often described as the dog days of bar review. It's hard to get motivated for a lot of people right now. It's still too far away for most people to feel really focused on it, and yet you're not comfortable, and you may not take it as seriously as you probably ought to, but you want to do something even at this point. So for most people, you want to be starting now, working a little bit in order to get the most benefit from the work you're going to be doing as you lead up to the test. Obviously, if you're in our course, I want to encourage you to follow your assignments and the time frames that we suggest that you spend on each assignment. It's definitely an advantage over those people that don't start studying until much, much later and have to compress a lot of material in a short period of time. The net benefit of starting now is that it keeps you moving through this kind of still period without spending too long on any one subject. At about 100 days, the exam results have come in from previous exams, and we've done a lot of things on our site to help bring you up to speed on that information. As you may know, we've got a podcast where we talk about those results. You can find the link on celebrationbarreview.com. In addition to that, we interview some successful bar exam takers after every exam, and I'm doing some of those interviews right now. And those interviews are also on our site. If you look under the heading for testimonials and case studies, you'll see them. These are great stories for you to watch and to see what people are talking about and what their experience on the bar was. It should be encouraging to you because the successes that people have in the face of the difficulties that they've got are absolutely extraordinary, and if they can do it, so can you. Now, one of the things that happens when results come in is that I get the opportunity to talk to people who took other bar reviews or studied on their own, and unfortunately they did not pass their exams. So now they're contacting us for assistance. And in a way, it's always sad because for the most part, I find that these people that I talk to in that situation generally worked very hard. They studied hard, they seem like they're bright people, and they made a good effort. And frankly, most of them would say that they're baffled by why they didn't pass the test. If you haven't been keeping up with the statistics, you may not be aware that today there are more repeat bar takers than there are first-time bar takers, particularly on the February exams. So this is not uncommon at all. But the most common reason that I find why people don't pass the bar is not that they didn't study hard enough or that they aren't smart enough. It's that they had a model or a paradigm of the exam that's in their head in terms of what the exam was measuring, what it was evaluating, and what the examiners were testing them on. But, and this is the important part, that paradigm or model is inaccurate. By saying that, I don't mean that it's inaccurate with respect to the substantive law. The truth is, most all of us in the bar review industry teach basically the same substantive law. We probably have different approaches to it, but we teach the same rules. The problem I'm talking about here is that people who fail typically have a study and test paradigm that just doesn't work in the real world of the bar exam. And here's the paradigm. The people who don't pass seem to believe that the bar exam is actually a test of how much law they can memorize and recite. In other words, they say to themselves, I'm going to memorize all the elements and all the rules, and then I'll just spit them back like I did in law school. For a minority of people, that approach is okay. It works. And some people pass. But here's the important point. Not most bar takers. In fact, most bar takers fail the exam. For the majority of bar takers, it's not enough to memorize and recite rules. And in our course, we don't emphasize memorization or recitation and cramming. Because of that, we consistently get better pass rate averages for repeat bar takers, even though we work with mostly repeaters. They do better than the state pass rate average. Why? Because we approach the exam from a different perspective. To try and illustrate that for you in perhaps a more practical way, I want to use a little embarrassing personal circumstance, just to show how you can get locked into a certain way of thinking and then lose sight on some other plausible explanations that are quite rational and could turn out to be true. So here's my situation. For a while I've noticed, but never commented, that whenever the toilet paper was getting down near the end of the roll, My significant other would just put out a new roll of toilet paper in the bathroom, but she never changed the old roll. I've assumed, as most men do over a period of time, that it's better to just keep my mouth shut. And even though I kept my mouth shut, it didn't mean I wasn't thinking about it periodically. In fact, in my brain, I built a very plausible set of reasons for why this behavior of hers occurs, because you have to understand, she's a very rational person, and I can't imagine why in the world she wouldn't change the toilet paper roll. So I thought in my own mind, it's probably because she doesn't want to chip her nails, or she doesn't want to deal with that crazy device that pops out at you from the toilet paper holder. And she's just being nice by putting out the next roll of toilet paper. It's her way of telling me, as couples tend to do without the use of words, that it's my time to change the toilet paper. And perhaps some of you can relate to this. I had quite innocently assumed that's what was going on, and it certainly wasn't worth commenting on. It was actually pretty trivial. I'm not sure exactly what it was that caused us to have the conversation one day, but somehow I guess I walked into the bathroom, saw the toilet paper roll, saw the new one right next to the old one, and I started to put it on the holder. And I think I said something to myself, and I was actually talking to myself, but I probably was speaking out loud since I tend to do that. And I said, why doesn't she ever change this? And my partner overheard me, and she stopped and said, excuse me, what did you just say? Well, I was trapped, and in the way you do when you're trapped, but you still have to actually say something. So I said, well, it kind of looks to me like you never changed the toilet paper roll. And she looked at me and said, you are such an idiot. I don't change the toilet paper because there's still paper on the roll. I use it all the way to the end, and I put out a new roll so that you won't be inconvenienced. She said then, I change plenty of toilet paper rolls, but you just don't notice. Now, it's hard to admit it in public, but I know she was right. I had this totally incorrect perception of why something was happening, and I acted on those beliefs. My behavior, everything I did with respect to the toilet paper and roll, was built on the assumption that what was happening was this idea that she just didn't want to change it. But in fact, that wasn't what was happening at all. Once she explained to me what she was doing, of course it made perfect sense, and I apologized profusely and tried to extricate myself from the mess I had made. You may understand how that goes. And what I now realize is that she just doesn't like to waste anything. Toilet paper wouldn't be different than anything else. The new paradigm made perfect sense. All right, my point is that in the bar review, people get similar, weird, misguided notions about what's going on. And then, like me with my toilet paper, they act in accordance with those beliefs. One of the big misbeliefs is I've got to learn everything to pass. In order to learn everything, I have to memorize everything because obviously that's how you learn. But let me just ask you, if that paradigm was not correct, if it was not true that you don't have to learn everything, and you don't have to memorize to learn anything, would it change the way you'd study? If you honestly think about that question, the only way you could answer would be to say, well, of course it would. If that were true, I would do everything completely differently. One of the big tasks that we're faced with in our course is getting people who've signed up with us and who are in the course to begin to refocus and change their study paradigm. If you've been in our webinar where we talk about how to make the next bar exam your last bar exam, I spend a good deal of time talking about this particular subject. But if you haven't seen it, I'll just say this. When you start to rethink the way your paradigm is set up, it changes everything. If you begin to think about what studying for the test would mean from the standpoint of the examiners, I think the question is then, what do we want to know about this potential applicant? Would our primary criteria be how well this applicant could memorize and recite the law? That doesn't seem very likely, does it? Or would it rather be how well can this applicant use the law or make arguments on behalf of their clients? How well can they identify distinguishing characteristics of certain principles of law? How well can they solve problems? Now, isn't that really the task of lawyers today? And not to put too fine a point on it, but that is what the next generation bar exam is going to be doing and testing because it's so important in our profession. Not just being robotic in memorizing and reciting. That is not a skill that good lawyers have. If you answer this question the way that the obvious evidence would lead you, you would say, well, yes, of course, that's completely different. So then I would ask, why are you spending your time making flashcards and creating outlines and doing all sorts of things to memorize if that's not really the skill that's being tested? That's a tough one, isn't it? So my message to you as we head into this 100-day mark until the bar exam is re-examine your assumptions. If your assumptions have not been productive for you up to this point, then rethink them. Do something different. Consider it from a new point of view. If this is your first time taking the bar, or perhaps you're someone who took the bar many years ago, and you're trying to remember what your assumptions were back then, Start with a fresh sheet of paper and think about it, or maybe a fresh roll of toilet paper, but rethink what it is that's going on in the test. I can assure you that when you do that exercise, it'll change the way you study and it will change it for the better. I encourage you to rethink your assumptions. Go back at it and see if you can come up with a different approach. And if you want to know more about our successful approach, just check the links here and click to find out more. I hope you have a great week of study, and for everybody, don't forget to change the toilet paper when the roll runs out. We'll be back again next week.